Copyright, a concept so simple yet complex that it made me feel like I had the smoothest brain in the world. This is a term that many people are familiar with but have not experienced working with. Within the US, we have copyright.gov, which explains what copyright is and what sort of creative work is protected. I'm Xiaoyao, and I have made the financially irresponsible decision of having 2.5 custom models without doing legal research on copyright, the different ways to break it down within the current creative landscape, and I wanted to share some of my experience navigating the art ownership space that VTubing inevitably falls into. I'm a little surprised that there wasn't a lot more videos that spoke to this for VTubing, with the exception of a well-known VTuber that graciously answered one of my questions in her chat. Prospective or existing VTubers most likely fall into one of 3 categories in which they went through to get the model. The first category, you draw and create your own model, whether that's a PNG tuber or a live 2D model. This is a relatively simple one because you created it for yourself and therefore you own it both morally and commercially. Second category, you purchase a publicly available model from Booth or another marketplace. Majority of the times, an artist puts out their terms of service on the sales page, and normally this public model provides you, the user, non-exclusive streaming rights with the model, and most of the time excludes merchandise production. Copyright for this category is also relatively simple, as the terms of service is very well defined. You get to stream with it but cannot use the character to create merchandise or contract the company to do anything else with it. The third category, you commission an artist to create a custom model from scratch, and you work with the artist to bring your model and avatar to life. This category perhaps is the most sought after category because you get to have an avatar that either represents you or something you like and are able to visually differentiate yourself to a higher degree from your peers. Copyright for this one was a very complex one for someone that's never commissioned art within America, let alone overseas. Within the US copyright landscape, first, understanding if there are no clear distinction of who the art belongs to, then the artwork will belong to the creator, even if you paid for it. This catches many people by surprise, including myself, and I've affirmed this as I look through some questions on the VTuber Discord, Reddit, and Twitter. So this is generally not an issue because majority of artists has a terms of service. A common terms of service pattern I saw included the usage level of the art or model, which broke down into the base price and doubling the base price for commercial rights. Sometimes you'll run into an artist with commercial rights that are already baked into the commission. But more often than not though, this terms of service does not spell everything out. I am someone that likes to own anything as much as I legally can when I purchase something or some services, and this really got me into a rabbit hole. I had some questions like, what does commercial rights even mean? What if my artist dislike me all of a sudden? Can they revoke these commercial rights? How long do I have these rights for? Does the rigger have partial copyrights too now? I ended up reading through copyright.gov/Title 17 and consulted 2 legal teams after reading it a few times. I think it's very important to have foundational understanding of Title 17 to have an educated conversation with your customer, your artist, or even your attorney. The fundamentals of Title 17, Section 201 outlines initial ownership in paragraph A, and in paragraph B, works made for hire, and in paragraph D, transfer of ownership. In summary, paragraph 8 states the owner of any creative work will belong to the author or artist that contributed to the work by default. In paragraph B, it outlines if you have the terms works made for hire, then all the rights of the creative piece belongs to the employer or commissioner, including the claims to authorship. Works made for hire needs to be explicit in your agreement if you do not have a employer-employee relationship. There's a need to understand work for hire is a US concept and is not recognized in many other countries. This is especially important depending on the level of ownership you want for your commissioned art. Now, this is where the concept of copyright and transfer of ownership comes into play. Paragraph D, transfer of ownership. In summary, this passage is important if you are an artist or an art commissioner that only wants guarantee of a partial copyright transfer, explicit statements involving exclusive copyright transfer, or any other sort of partial economic or commercial copyrights. Or maybe you're an artist that does not want to forego all their rights to the work, such as your moral rights or your claims to authorship. A transfer of copyright makes sense to look into. I've encountered a number of artists imposing restrictions after agreeing on a work made for hire clause or a full copyright transfer clause. Having a restriction contradicts the definition of works made for hire or a full economic copyright transfer, so it's important to hash this out together.
Jingle, jingle.
The final info dump comes from Chapter 2, Section 203, which discusses the termination of copyright transfers and licenses granted by the author or artist. This is important because if you both agree to do a partial copyright transfer and both party agrees that the piece is not a work made for hire, my understanding is that either party's rights to the model can be challenged. Now in paragraph A, the conditions for termination. And then the third sentence, termination of any grant may be affected at any time during a period of 5 years beginning at the end of 35 years from the date of execution of the grant. This passage speaks to in what condition an artist or author of the piece of work may terminate a copyright license. In my mind, that was great. That means I have a copyright transfer for at least 35 years, assuming no agreements are breached by either side. Some things to consider: if you have a license and not a full copyright transfer, you should keep in mind that you may not have an exclusive license to the VTube model, even if it's fully customizable. But you can take into account, it can be argued that the nature of VTubing and customizing a model, it is implied that it is an exclusive model and art piece for you, but I'm assuming this can be potentially challenged. Now, to answer some of the questions I asked myself earlier and on this video, what does commercial rights mean? It means I can produce merchandise or derivative work of the character. What if my artist dislikes me all of a sudden? Can they revoke the commercial rights? And no, they cannot unless it's been after 35 years or if there's a breach on our agreement. How long do I have these rights for? According to US law, a minimum of 35 years. Does the rigger have partial copyrights too? No, not on the Photoshop files nor the character concepts. The copyright they own is the process with Live 2D. Great, now we understand enough to have an educated conversation with legal counsel and our peers, right? Well, not necessarily. Maybe I'll cover this in a different video, but a new question comes in as we progress. What if your artist is not based in the same country as you? Which legal body takes precedent? Many countries have their own copyright laws, and an agreement of which legal body to follow will be needed, and this can be confusing very quickly. How does a copyright transfer differ in those countries? What's the nuance between a copyright transfer versus a copyright license? Does the copyright pertain only to the Photoshop files? What about the character concept? What about derivative work? So those are things I'll try to address in the future. Now, why am I making this? Many VTubers know that models can get pretty expensive, and if I were to invest in a model both monetarily and emotionally, I think it was very important for me to understand and want ownership of the creation to the fullest extent. There's a lot of granular details I skimmed over for myself, but these level of granular details will be different for everyone because everyone will have a different perspective on value versus time investment on this topic.